They barely noticed her when she stepped into the glass-walled office, wearing a red delivery uniform and carrying an insulated bag that marked her as invisible before she even spoke. In that towering building of power and privilege, she was seen as background noise, a brief interruption in a room where million-dollar decisions were made by people who believed intelligence wore tailored suits and spoke with polished accents. Smiles of mockery passed silently across the table. Assumptions were made in seconds. No one imagined that within moments, this delivery girl will become the most important person in the room. No one imagined that the language she carried within her would stop a corporate disaster, expose quiet racism, and force powerful people to confront how dangerously wrong they had been. Before the story continues, if you believe stories like this matter, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Stories so more real voices can be heard. Amina had learned early in life how to disappear in plain sight. Growing up in a low-income neighborhood shaped by migration, struggle, and resilience, she understood that survival often depended on how quietly you moved through spaces that were not designed for you. Her mother had immigrated years earlier, carrying 2 languages, 3 jobs, and an unshakable belief that dignity was something you carried inside, even when the world refused to recognize it. Amina was brilliant, though brilliance rarely announces itself and people's society chooses to overlook. She spoke Arabic fluently, learned English by watching late-night news with subtitles, and picked up bits of French from an elderly neighbor who exchanged lessons for groceries. But none of that appeared on her resume in bold letters. What did appear was a series of part-time jobs, delivery work, and customer service roles that kept food on the table and allowed her younger siblings to stay in school. The delivery job was supposed to be temporary. It paid the bills, offered flexible hours, and required no one to look past her uniform. She knew how customers saw her. As a service, not a person. A transaction, not a mind. Corporate offices were the worst. Tall buildings with reflective windows always made her feel smaller before she even stepped inside. Security guards watched her longer. Receptionists spoke slower. Executives barely looked up from their screens. That morning, the order had come from one of the city's most powerful consulting firms. A large order, urgent delivery, boardroom level, the kind of place where people wore confidence like perfume and believed mistakes happened only to others. Amina picked up the order without hesitation, adjusting the straps of her delivery bag as she navigated the city streets. Inside the firm, the atmosphere was tense. A major international deal was in its final phase. Executives sat around a long table, laptops open, documents scattered, eyes sharp with stress. The deal involved a Middle Eastern conglomerate, one of the most influential business entities in the region. Months of negotiations had led to this moment. One wrong move could collapse everything. Amina stepped in quietly, waiting for someone to acknowledge her. No one did at first. She stood near the door, the faint hum of air conditioning filling the silence between hurried whispers and keyboard clicks. When someone finally gestured toward her, it was with impatience, not gratitude. She placed the food carefully on the table, her movements precise, respectful. As she turned to leave, laughter bubbled up from one side of the room. Not loud, but careless. The kind of laughter that assumes safety and cruelty. Someone made a remark about delivery workers always being in the way. Another joked about accents and misunderstandings. No one said her name. No one asked it. Amina felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Years of moments like this had taught her how to swallow discomfort and keep moving. She adjusted her bag and prepared to leave, unaware that fate had positioned her at the center of something far bigger than a delivery order. As Amina reached for the door, the tone in the room shifted. Confusion spread across the executives' faces as one of them stared at an email on the screen. A document had just arrived from the Middle Eastern partners. Urgent, marked critical. The language was Arabic, formal, complex, legal and cultural nuances layered within each sentence. Panic followed quickly. The firm had translators on call, but none were immediately available. Time was slipping. The response window was narrow, and silence could be interpreted as disrespect. Someone muttered about delays. Another cursed under their breath. The laughter from moments earlier evaporated into anxiety. Amina paused. The words on the screen were visible from where she stood. She understood them instantly. Not just the language, but the intent behind it. The message wasn't hostile, it was cautious. The partners were concerned about a clause that, in their cultural context, carried implications of mistrust. A poorly worded response could end negotiations entirely. She hesitated. Years of conditioning told her this wasn't her place. Delivery girls didn't interrupt boardrooms. People like her weren't invited into decision-making spaces. Speaking up meant risking humiliation, dismissal, or worse, being accused of overstepping. Another executive spoke sharply, suggesting a rushed, automated translation be sent. Amina knew that would be disastrous. Automated language stripped meaning, erased respect, and ignored cultural subtleties that mattered deeply in high-level Middle Eastern negotiations. Her heart pounded. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that silence sometimes protected you, but sometimes destroyed you. Amina turned back. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the room as she explained that the message wasn't a threat, but a test. She clarified the cultural weight of the words, the importance of humility in the response, and the necessity of acknowledging honor and trust explicitly. The room froze. Faces turned toward her, not with laughter this time, but disbelief. Some were offended, others confused. A delivery girl explaining international diplomacy? A few looked embarrassed, as if suddenly aware of how wrong they had been. One executive demanded to know how she could possibly understand the document. Amina explained simply that Arabic was her first language, and that she had studied its formal and business forms extensively. Skepticism lingered, but desperation outweighed pride. They let her continue. Amina translated the message aloud, explaining each phrase's deeper meaning. She suggested a response, one that acknowledged mutual respect, reaffirmed shared values, and corrected a misunderstanding without assigning blame. Her delivery was measured, respectful, and precise. As she spoke, tension eased. The executives began taking notes. The room's energy shifted from panic to focus. The response was drafted exactly as she suggested and sent immediately. Minutes later, confirmation arrived. The partners were satisfied. The deal was back on track. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was heavy with realization. The same people who had laughed now avoided her gaze. Their assumptions had nearly cost them millions. Their prejudice had blinded them to the most qualified person in the room. Amina didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply gathered her bag, ready to leave, but something had changed. Just as Amina reached the door, a senior executive stopped her, not with arrogance, but urgency. Questions followed. Where had she learned Arabic at that level? Did she have experience in translation? Would she consider staying a moment longer? What began as curiosity quickly became awe as Amina shared fragments of her background, not as a plea, but as context. She spoke of navigating multiple cultures, of understanding how language carried history, honor, and power. She spoke of translating documents for community members who couldn't advocate for themselves, of watching deals fall apart because no one bothered to listen properly. The room felt smaller now. The glass walls reflected faces that looked uncomfortable with their own behavior. The realization wasn't just that Amina was intelligent. It was that they had dismissed her because of her race, her job, her appearance. An internal reckoning unfolded. This wasn't just about one delivery girl. It was about a system that consistently underestimated people like her, then acted shocked when brilliance appeared where it shouldn't. The executives offered compensation for her time. Then came something more unexpected, an offer to connect her with their international relations department. Not charity, opportunity. Amina listened carefully. She had learned to be cautious of sudden interest from people who once ignored her. She accepted nothing on the spot, understanding the power of choice. As she finally left the building, the city felt different. Not kinder, but more exposed. She had seen how thin the line was between invisibility and importance, how easily prejudice could cost people everything. Inside the boardroom, the deal was saved, but the real disruption was internal. Conversations shifted. Policies were questioned. Unconscious bias training suddenly felt less optional. One moment of truth had cracked the polished surface of corporate certainty. Amina returned to her delivery routes, but the world no longer felt quite the same. The story of that day spread quietly through professional networks, not as gossip, but as a lesson. A delivery girl had done what experts nearly failed to do. She had reminded powerful people that competence doesn't wear a uniform. Weeks later, Amina received an email, then another. Interviews followed, not because she demanded recognition, but because truth has a way of surfacing when it's undeniable. She eventually transitioned into a role that valued her skills, not her appearance. But she never forgot where she came from. She continued translating for her community, mentoring young people who had been taught to doubt their own brilliance. The firm implemented changes too. Not perfectly, not instantly, but awareness had been forced upon them. And awareness is the beginning of accountability. This story wasn't about a miracle. It was about how often intelligence is ignored because it arrives in a body society as already judged. It was about how racism doesn't always shout. It often laughs quietly, assumes carelessly, and nearly destroys everything in its path. Amina's voice mattered long before that day. The world simply hadn't been listening. And that is the cost of prejudice, not just to those who endure it, but to everyone who refuses to see. Backhand index pointing right if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story. Your support helps these voices reach the world.